The crack of a rifle shot was the only answer the Montana hills gave. Fiona Campbell didn't need to hear it twice. She threw herself behind a weathered porch pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The wood was rough against her cheek, smelling of pine and old rain. It was the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved into chaos. Montana Territory, 1875. A place where promises were written in dust, and the sunset was just as likely to erase them. And Fiona was clinging to a promise that was already an hour late. Angus Lowell, the man who'd sworn to be her future, had promised he'd be back by nightfall. He'd ridden for Fort Benton, for reinforcements, for the law. He'd kissed her goodbye with the sun on his face and a vow on his lips. But now the sun was gone, bled out behind the mountains, and the only men who'd come were the Blackwell gang. They crept through the twilight like shadows detaching from the trees, their laughter low and ugly. Fiona clutched her father's old shotgun, the metal turning icy in her trembling hands. She was 22 years old, a girl raised in Boston's polite society, and she was entirely, terrifyingly alone. "You've got until first light, Miss Campbell." The voice belonged to Silas Blackwell. It was a grater of a voice, rough and mean, and it carried across the yard like a threat. "Sign over the deed to this claim, or we'll burn this cabin to the ground with you inside it." Her father's dreams of silver had brought them west, and those same dreams had put him in a shallow grave just 2 months ago, leaving Fiona with a patch of dirt that was turning out to be more valuable and more dangerous than either of them had ever imagined. "I'll never sign," she shouted back, her voice a thin thread against the vast, darkening sky. But there was steel in it. "This land is mine by right." Another ripple of laughter from the darkness. "Then we'll see you at dawn, miss. Hope you've made your peace." Fiona swallowed hard, the bitter sting of betrayal a poison in her throat. Angus had promised. They'd planned it all. He rides for help. She holds the fort. Simple, clear. Their future depended on it. His kiss was still a ghost on her lips, a warm memory turning cold with every tick of her father's pocket watch. He wasn't coming. The night deepened, a thick, starless black. Fiona barricaded the door with their only heavy table, shoved a chest against the shutters. The little cabin became a wooden tomb. Every creak of the logs, every sigh of the wind was the sound of approaching footsteps. She moved from the front window to the back, shotgun in hand, fighting the leaden pull of exhaustion. Midnight came and went. 2 o'clock. 4. Each hour was a nail in the coffin of her hope. Whatever had kept Angus away, cowardice, deception, or something far worse, the result was the same. She was on her own. As the first pale gray fingers of dawn touched the eastern sky, a profound, chilling reality settled over her like a shroud. Then came the sound of horses. Her heart leaped, just for a second. Hope is a stubborn, foolish thing. She scrambled to a crack in the shutters, peering out. It wasn't Angus. It was Silas Blackwell and 5 of his men, spreading out in a semicircle around her tiny fortress, their rifles glinting in the new light. Her hands shook as she loaded the last of her cartridges. Her breath plumed in the cold air. "Time's up, Miss Campbell," Blackwell called, his voice booming with finality. Fiona took a deep, shuddering breath. She raised the shotgun, the weight of it a grim comfort. If this was the end, she would not meet it on her knees. But before she could answer, another sound cut through the morning air. Hoofbeats, fast and hard, approaching from the west, from the direction of Fort Benton. A lone rider, silhouetted against the rising sun. He was tall in the saddle, moving with an easy, powerful grace. But it wasn't Angus. This man was broader, heavier set. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and a long duster that flapped behind him like dark wings. He rode straight toward the cabin, straight toward Blackwell's line, as if he didn't have a care in the world, as if he couldn't see the 6 rifles aimed in his direction. Blackwell turned his horse, confused. "Mister, you're riding into a heap of trouble," he shouted. The stranger pulled his mount to a halt, the horse dancing nervously as dust billowed around its hooves. When the man spoke, his voice was deep and steady as the mountains themselves. "The only trouble I see," he said calmly, "is 6 men threatening a woman on her own land." Blackwell's hand drifted toward his pistol. "This ain't your concern, stranger. Ride on." "That's where you're wrong." The man dismounted in one fluid, powerful motion. As the duster fell open, the morning sun caught the glint of a worn gun belt, and pinned to the vest beneath it was the distinctive, unmistakable star of a United States Marshal. The blood drained from Silas Blackwell's face. "Federal Marshal Adam Lawson," the stranger said, his voice flat and cold as a river stone. "And I came for you, Blackwell. You and your boys are wanted for claim jumping and murder in 3 territories." "This is a private matter," Blackwell stammered. "It stopped being private," Lawson said, his gaze unwavering, "when you put a bullet in George Campbell and tried to steal his daughter's rightful claim." The world inside the cabin fell silent. Her father. They'd said it was a mining accident. A lie. It had been murder all along. The marshal's hand rested casually near the butt of his Colt revolver. "Now, you boys have a choice. You can ride with me peacefully to Fort Benton to stand trial, or we can settle this another way. Right here, right now." Tension crackled in the air. Fiona held her breath, her finger trembling on the trigger of her shotgun. Blackwell's eyes darted between his men, doing the math. 6 against 1. The odds seemed good. But there was something in the marshal's stance, an absolute, unnerving stillness, that gave them all pause. One of Blackwell's men, younger and dumber than the rest, decided he didn't like the math. "You won't take us all, lawman," he growled, his hand flashing toward his pistol. What happened next was a blur of violence so fast, Fiona almost missed it. Marshal Lawson's hand moved like a striking snake. His revolver cleared the leather, cocked, and fired in a single, impossible motion. The crack of the shot echoed off the hills, and Blackwell's man collapsed in the dirt, clutching a shattered shoulder, his own gun not even halfway out of its holster. Lawson's revolver was already covering the others. Smoke curled from the barrel into the crisp morning air. "Anyone else?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The fight drained out of the Blackwell gang like water from a bucket. Within minutes, they were disarmed, their hands bound with rope from Lawson's saddlebags. They were defeated men, their bluster and cruelty gone, replaced by sullen fear. Only when the last man was secured did Marshal Lawson finally turn toward the cabin. "Miss Campbell," he called out, his voice softer now. "Fiona Campbell, you can come out. It's safe." Fiona emerged slowly, the heavy shotgun still clutched in her hands. She was a wreck. Her hair had fallen from its pins, her dress was smudged with dirt and gunpowder, and dark bruised circles lay beneath her eyes. Disbelief and exhaustion had rendered her completely speechless. The marshal's expression softened as he took in her appearance. He removed his hat, revealing dark, sweat-dampened hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "How?" Fiona finally managed, her voice a raw whisper. "How do you know my name?" A shadow passed over the marshal's face, a flicker of something that looked like pity. "I found Angus Lowell yesterday," he said, his voice gentle. "About 15 miles from here. He was ambushed on the trail to Fort Benton." The world tilted and spun beneath Fiona's feet. Is he dead?" "He's alive," Lawson said quickly, "but badly wounded. They took him to the doctor in town. Before he passed out, he told me everything. About you, about Blackwell, about the claim. He took a step closer. He asked me to come for you, said you'd be waiting. I rode through the night, but the trails are rough in the dark. I'm sorry I didn't make it before dawn. The strength that had held her up for 24 hours vanished. Her legs gave way. The shotgun slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the porch. The marshal moved with surprising speed, closing the distance between them and catching her before she hit the ground. His arms were strong and steady around her, holding her up. I waited all night, she whispered, her voice breaking as the terror and relief finally crashed over her in a tidal wave. I thought no one was coming. He held her tight, a stranger's arms her only anchor in a world that had tried to tear her apart. I came for you, Miss Campbell, he said, his voice a low, firm rumble against her ear. I always keep my promises. And in that moment, with the rising sun on her face and the steady heartbeat of a stranger beneath her cheek, Fiona Campbell started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, some promises in the West were actually made to be kept. Marshal Adam Lawson didn't leave right away. He stayed for 3 days. He said it was to make sure the claim was secure, that no other vultures were circling. He arranged for deputies from Fort Benton to haul Blackwell and his gang to a jail cell where they'd await the hangman's noose. He told Fiona they would pay for her father's murder. Justice was coming. During those 3 days, he helped her. He mended the fence Blackwell's men had torn down. He rehung a shutter that had been splintered by a stray bullet. He worked with a quiet, efficient competence that was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. She found herself watching him, the easy way he moved, the strength in his hands. On the morning of the 4th day, she found him saddling his horse in the pre-dawn chill. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. A cold knot of disappointment formed in her stomach. He tightened the cinch, not meeting her gaze. "Got to report back, and I need to check on your friend, Angus." "He's not my friend," Fiona said, the words sharp and sudden, surprising even herself. "Not anymore." Adam paused his work, finally turning to look at her. The first rays of sun were catching the angles of his face, making him look like he was carved from the mountain itself. "He was wounded trying to get help for you, Miss Campbell." "I know." Fiona wrapped her arms around herself, a poor defense against the morning cold and the turmoil inside her. "And I'm grateful he sent you. But before he left—" She hesitated, the memory of Angus's kiss now tasting like ash. "He asked me to marry him. If he returned with help, we'd be married. We'd work this claim together." "And you agreed?" Adam's face was a mask, impossible to read. "I thought I did," she admitted, shaking her head. "But all night, when I was alone, when I thought he'd abandoned me to die, I realized something. I'd said yes because it was practical, because 2 people have a better chance out here than 1 alone. But I don't love him, Marshal, and I won't tie my life to a man for convenience. The West isn't kind to women on their own," he said softly. "I'm aware." Her chin lifted. There was a strength in her now that hadn't been there 4 days ago. "But I'd rather face it honestly." A flicker of something crossed his eyes. Respect. "What will you do now?" "Keep working my father's claim. He believed there was silver here, and I'm going to prove him right." She met his gaze without flinching. "I may be a Boston girl, but I'm a fast learner." A small, slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I don't doubt that for a second, Miss Campbell." "Fiona," she corrected him. "My name is Fiona." "Fiona," he repeated, and the way he said it, low and thoughtful, sent a strange warmth through her. He finished with his horse and looked out over the valley, still painted in the soft colors of dawn. "I found something," when I was patching the wall near your father's desk." He reached into his duster and pulled out a folded, slightly crumpled letter. It fell behind a loose board. "Looks like it's from Angus." Fiona's heart went still. She took the paper from his outstretched hand. It was Angus's handwriting, dated just a week ago, but it wasn't addressed to her. It was addressed to Silas Blackwell. Her blood ran cold as she read. It wasn't a love letter. It was a business proposal. Angus was offering to sell the location of the silver vein her father had discovered. He wrote about Fiona as an obstacle, a sentimental girl who would need to be managed after the deal was done. His ride to Fort Benton wasn't for help. It was a lie. He was riding to meet Blackwell, to betray her, to sell her future for a bag of coin. The ambush. It suddenly made a terrible, sickening kind of sense. It wasn't Blackwell's men who had attacked Angus. It must have been a rival outfit, someone who knew a deal was going down and wanted a piece of it. Angus hadn't been a hero on a mission. He'd been a snake caught in another snake's trap. She looked up at Adam, the letter trembling in her hand. The world had tilted on its axis once again. "He didn't send you, did he?" she whispered. Adam's gaze was steady, his stormy eyes full of a grim understanding. "No. I was tracking Blackwell for other crimes. My posse and I stumbled on the aftermath of the ambush. We found Angus, half dead. He confessed everything, babbling and begging me to save you. Not out of love, I suspect, but because a dead girl can't be forced to sign a deed." The final piece of the lie clicked into place. The ugliness of it stole her breath. "You knew," she said, her voice flat. "You've known this whole time." "I did," he admitted. "I didn't tell you because you'd just survived an ordeal. You thought the man you loved was a hero. I saw no reason to tear that down until you were safe and strong enough to hear the truth." She should have been angry. She should have felt manipulated. But all she felt was a profound, weary gratitude. He had protected her not just from Blackwell's guns, but from a truth that might have broken her spirit completely. He mounted his horse, gathering the reins in his hands. "I'll be back this way in 2 weeks," he said, his voice returning to its official, formal tone. "Part of my regular patrol. I'll check in on you." "I'll be here," she said, the words a promise. She would not be broken. She would not run. "2 weeks, then," he said, tipping his hat. "Try not to get into any gunfights while I'm gone." As she watched him ride away, a silhouette against the sun he'd ridden in with, Fiona felt something new. The pain of Angus's betrayal was a sharp, clean wound. But beneath it, there was something else. A flicker of anticipation. A sense that her story wasn't over. In fact, it felt like it had just begun. True to his word, Marshal Adam Lawson returned exactly 2 weeks later. Fiona had made those 2 weeks count. The shock of Angus's betrayal had burned away her grief and left behind a core of pure, unyielding determination. She threw herself into her father's work, deciphering his cryptic notes and maps, learning the language of rock and silver. She spent her days in the small mine shaft, her hands raw, her muscles aching, but her spirit soaring. She'd found it. A thin, glittering seam of silver, richer than her father had even dared to hope. It was proof. Proof that he'd been right. Proof that she could do this. When Adam rode into the yard, she was hauling a bucket of ore into the sunlight, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tied back in a messy knot. She felt his eyes on her and looked up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, a mixture of surprise and something else, something warmer. "Looks like a productive 2 weeks," he said, dismounting. "Very," she said, a proud smile spreading across her face. "Would you like to see?" The genuine interest in his eyes as she showed him the silver vein was a balm to her soul. He didn't patronize her or humor her. He asked smart questions. He listened. He saw her not as a damsel in distress, but as an equal. That evening, over a rabbit stew, he brought news from Fort Benton. Blackwell and his men will hang next month, he told her. The whole territory knows what they did to your father. Fiona nodded, a chapter of her life finally, truly closing. And Angus? Adam's face tightened. Recovering. He's been telling anyone who will listen a wild story about how he's your fiancé, and this claim is half his. He's a coward, but he's a convincing liar. It doesn't matter, Fiona said, her voice firm. Let him talk. The truth lives here. She gestured to the cabin, to the mine, to the land around them. They sat in a comfortable silence, the fire crackling in the hearth. It was a silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken understanding. I've been reassigned, Adam said suddenly, breaking the spell. Fiona's heart dropped. Oh. They're moving me to the Idaho border. More claim jumpers, more trouble. He stared into his coffee cup. It's a 6-month assignment. 6 months, an eternity. The thought of not seeing him for that long left an unexpected gaping hole in her chest. When do you leave? End of the week. He finally looked up, his stormy eyes meeting hers across the small table. Unless I have a compelling reason to refuse the assignment. The air grew thick, the fire popped and hissed. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. What kind of reason would that be, Marshal? Adam, he corrected softly. And it would have to be a very compelling one, like a woman who owns a valuable silver claim and might need protection from liars and thieves. Is that all it would be? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Protection? He reached across the table, his calloused fingers covering hers. The touch was electric, a jolt that shot straight through her. No, Fiona, that's not all it would be. She knew in that moment the profound difference between a practical arrangement and a true connection. Angus had offered her a partnership. This man, this quiet, steady marshal, was offering her something else entirely. I can't ask you to give up your duty for me, she said, though every part of her wanted to. You're not asking, I'm offering. His hand closed around hers, strong and warm. I've spent 10 years chasing outlaws across this country. I've lived in the saddle and slept under the stars. Maybe it's time to put down some roots. With a woman you barely know, she challenged gently. A corner of his mouth lifted in that half-smile she was beginning to know so well. I know enough. I know you're the bravest person I've ever met. I know you face down danger instead of running from it. And I know that from the moment I saw you standing on that porch, holding that shotgun, something inside me shifted. Fiona's throat tightened. I waited all night for a man who betrayed me, she said softly. And then you appeared with the sunrise. I came for you, he repeated the words he'd said that first morning. And I'd like to stay, if you'll have me. Instead of answering, Fiona rose from her chair, circled the table, and stood before him. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the solid strength of him. He looked up at her, his eyes asking a question his words did not. When their lips met, it wasn't a hesitant first kiss. It was a recognition, a homecoming. It felt as though some lost part of her soul had finally found its way back, guided by a stranger who had ridden in with the dawn. By the time the first snows of winter fell, the Campbell homestead was no longer the lonely, vulnerable outpost it had been. It was a home. Adam had resigned his commission as a marshal, a decision that sent ripples through the territory, but felt profoundly right to both of them. Together, they poured their energy into the mine. With Adam's strength and practical knowledge, and Fiona's sharp mind and tireless determination, the silver claim flourished. They hired 2 trustworthy men from a nearby settlement, and the trickle of silver became a steady stream. Their partnership was seamless. He taught her how to shoot a revolver with accuracy. She taught him how to read the classics by the firelight. They built a life in the quiet, isolated beauty of the Montana wilderness, their world contained within the small cabin and the promise of the land. One evening, with a blizzard howling outside, Fiona sat at the table recording the day's yields. Adam was by the fire, cleaning his revolver, the familiar motions methodical and calming. "I received a letter from my aunt in Boston," she said, breaking the silence. "She says it is unseemly for me to be out here, unchaperoned. She wants me to come home." Adam looked up, his expression unreadable. "And what did you tell her?" "Nothing yet." Fiona left the table and went to sit on the hearth beside him, soaking in the warmth of the fire. "Do you ever miss it? The life of a marshal?" "Sometimes I miss the ride," he admitted, "but I don't miss the loneliness." He set his revolver aside and looked at her, his gaze intense. "Do you miss Boston?" "I miss libraries," she said with a small smile, "and conversations that aren't about the price of ore. But I don't miss the corsets, or the feeling that my life was a path already laid out for me by others." They had shared everything: work, meals, danger, and for months now, a bed. Their bodies knew each other with a raw, desperate intimacy born of isolation and mutual respect. But there were 3 words that remained unspoken, hovering in the space between them. "I'd like my aunt to meet the man I love," she said, the words finally tumbling out, quiet but steady in the storm-lashed cabin. Adam's breath hitched. He reached for her hand, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. He brought her fingers to his lips, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've loved you since that first morning," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Since I saw you ready to take on the whole world with nothing but a shotgun and a spine of steel." "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Wasn't sure a Boston-bred lady would want a man with no family name, no education to speak of. All I have are these hands, and what they know how to do." Fiona leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Those hands built our home. They kept me safe. They held me in the dark." She kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss, full of all the things they hadn't said. "I don't want a Boston gentleman. I want you." The next morning, Adam was gone before she woke. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. It was the first time since he'd stayed that he hadn't been there when she opened her eyes. He rode back into the yard at midday, his horse lathered from a hard ride. He stomped the snow from his boots on the porch and entered the cabin, his face grim. "Adam, is everything all right?" "That depends." He took off his hat and duster. Beneath them, he was wearing his best clothes, the formal suit he kept for court appearances. And then he did something that stunned her into absolute silence. He dropped to one knee. From his pocket he pulled a small, hand-carved wooden box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a piece of dark velvet, was a ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple band of silver, clearly forged from the ore of their own mine. Inlaid in the silver were tiny deep blue stones that glittered like a winter night sky. "Fiona Campbell," he began, his voice low and earnest. "I rode to Fort Benton and back since dawn. The silver is from your father's claim. The stones are sapphires I panned from a creek bed years ago, always saving them well, for a reason I didn't understand until I met you." Tears blurred Fiona's vision. "Adam, I can't give you Boston libraries or society balls," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can promise you my whole heart. I can promise to stand by you, to fight for you, and to build a life with you that's as real and as strong as these mountains. I promise to cherish the fire in you, not try to put it out." He took a deep, shaky breath. "Fiona Campbell, will you marry me?" She knelt down in front of him, so their eyes were level. She cupped his rugged face in her hands. "When I waited all night for Angus," she whispered, I thought I was waiting for a practical solution, for safety. Now I know I was just waiting for you, for a love that feels like coming home." His eyes searched hers, hope and fear warring in their stormy depths. "Is that a yes?" "Yes," she breathed, her lips finding his. "Yes, Adam Lawson, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Fort Benton. The judge presided, and their only witnesses were the 2 miners who worked the claim. Snow fell in thick, silent blankets outside, muffling the world and making the little church feel like the only place on earth. Fiona wore a simple dress of deep green velvet, and Adam wore his formal suit. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Adam kissed her with a reverence that took her breath away. "Mrs. Lawson," he murmured against her lips, and the name settled over her, not as a loss of herself, but as the finding of a part she never knew was missing. That winter was the harshest in Montana's history, but for Adam and Fiona, it was a honeymoon. Trapped by the snow, they built a world within the 4 walls of their cabin. They made plans, they dreamed, and by the time the spring thaw came, turning the hills green and wild with new life, they had news. Fiona was pregnant. The reality of a child changed everything. "This is rough country to raise a family," Adam said one evening, his hand resting protectively on Fiona's still flat stomach. "The mine is profitable, but it won't last forever." His next words stunned her. "I've been offered a position, sheriff of Helena." Helena was a city, or as close to one as Montana had. It meant a proper house, schools, doctors. It meant civilization. It also meant leaving the wild, beautiful place where they had fallen in love. "Would you be happy?" Fiona asked, "pinned down in a town after all your years on the trail?" "I'd be happy wherever you and our child are," he answered simply. "But the thought of coming home to you every night, instead of once every few weeks, that has its appeal." They sold the claim that summer to a large mining consortium from the east for a price that secured their future beyond their wildest dreams. By the time the first leaves began to turn, they were moving into a handsome brick house on a quiet street in Helena. The transition was not without its struggles. Adam, a man of action and instinct, chafed under the bureaucracy of town politics. Fiona, for all her love of books and comfort, found herself missing the profound silence of the mountains, the cry of a hawk overhead. But they were partners. They adapted. They compromised. They built a new life brick by brick. In November, as the first snows of winter dusted the rooftops of Helena, Fiona gave birth to a daughter. They named her Eleanor Grace Lawson. Eleanor for Fiona's mother, Grace for the unearned blessing they had found in each other. The years that followed were a blur of life. Adam's reputation as a fair and unshakable sheriff became legendary. Fiona, using her newfound wealth and Boston education, established Helena's first public lending library, a sanctuary of words and ideas in the rugged frontier. 2 more children followed, Thomas in 1878 and Catherine in 1881. Life was not a fairy tale. There were harsh winters, bouts of sickness that brought them to their knees with worry, and the constant low-grade danger that was part of being the top lawman in a territory still finding its feet. But the foundation they had built in that first, isolated cabin held fast. On their 10th anniversary, Adam came to Fiona with a surprise. He had used a portion of their savings to buy a large parcel of land just outside the city. A proper ranch, with rolling hills, a clear running creek, and a sky that went on forever. "Are we becoming ranchers now, Sheriff?" Fiona teased, her arm linked through his as they stood on a ridge overlooking their new property. "I've been sheriff for almost 10 years, he said, his expression serious. "The territory's changing. It's more settled, less need for men like me." He looked at her, the lines around his eyes deeper now, silver threaded in his dark hair. "I'm thinking of stepping down, raising horses, raising our children where they have room to run." "And you?" she asked. "Are you ready for that change?" "This life," he said, gesturing to the city behind them. "It's been good to us, but I never want you to feel trapped. Do you miss the adventure of those early days?" Fiona laughed, a clear, bright sound that carried on the wind. "Adam Lawson, do you think raising 3 children isn't an adventure? Or building a library from nothing? Or being married to you?" She turned to face him, placing her hands on his chest. "I once waited all night for a man who never came," she reminded him softly. "And then you rode in with the dawn. Everything since then, every single day, has been the adventure. This is just the next chapter." He pulled her close, his kiss as passionate and sure as it had been on their wedding day. "So we start something new," he murmured against her lips. Again. They moved to the ranch the following spring. Adam resigned as sheriff, though his counsel was still sought by governors and judges. Fiona turned the day-to-day operations of the library over to a committee she had trained, but remained its fiercest advocate and benefactor. They built a sprawling ranch house, a home filled with books and laughter and the smell of baking bread. Their children thrived. Eleanor inherited her father's quiet way with horses. Thomas, his health always delicate, had a brilliant mind for numbers and design. And Catherine, the youngest, was a wild spirit, more comfortable exploring the creeks and woods than sitting in a classroom. Their story became a quiet legend in the tapestry of Montana. The Boston lady and the gunslinging marshal who had built an empire not just of land and silver, but of family, community, and unwavering love. Years turned into decades. The territory became a state. The children grew up and began their own lives. Adam and Fiona grew old together, the rhythms of their life tied to the seasons of the ranch. One evening, as they sat on their wide front porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky, Adam took her hand. It was a hand he had held for over 30 years, its skin softer now, but the feel of it as familiar as his own heartbeat. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Not going back to Boston, choosing this life?" Fiona, her hair now more silver than brown, leaned her head against his shoulder. "The girl who waited all night in that cabin thought she wanted safety," she said, her voice full of a deep, quiet certainty. "She thought she wanted a practical plan. She had no idea that what her soul was really crying out for was a man who would ride through the dark for her." She looked at him, her love for him, a visible, palpable thing. "You didn't just save my life that morning, Adam Lawson. You showed me what my life could be. You came for me then, and you've come for me every day since." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "And I found a woman who taught me that a home is not a place you find," he said, his voice thick. "It's something you build, together." They sat in silence as the last light faded and the first stars pricked the vast purple sky. The promise made at dawn had not been for a life without hardship, but for a life of shared purpose, of unwavering partnership. In a land where so much was transient, they had built something that would last. What do you think is the true measure of a promise? Is it the words spoken, or the life that is lived? If you enjoyed this story of a promise kept against all odds, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the heart of the Old West.